Hello, ladies.
I'll mute it.
We are so excited that you all are here today and very excited about the topic tonight. If this is your first National Virtual Gathering, please make sure to pop over to our website, nlhg.org, to learn more about National Ladies Homestead Gathering, what we do, what our mission and vision is. We're just excited to share that with you all. I do have an announcement that I want to make, though. I would love to present our new media director, Nancy Anderson. So I'm going to go ahead and bring her on. Nancy, so glad to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and be part of this.
Awesome. So Nancy is going to fill in as our hostess for the evening. And we're going to go ahead and get started with that.
Thank you, Miranda. Hi, Lori. So let me introduce Lori Hunt. She is our guest speaker. Lori is the heart behind Grace Ridge Homestead in North Idaho, where she and her family live off-grid and raise Nigerian dwarf dairy goats, poultry, rabbits, and other livestock. Alongside making goat milk soaps and body care products, Lori has spent years mentoring others in quality goat care, staying active in 4-H, and supporting her local farmers market. Please help me welcome Lori Hunt.
Hi, thank you.
Oops, is your microphone off?
It should be on. Can you hear me?
It should be on. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess that's me. So I was invited to talk about goat gestation and delivery. It's a really large topic, and I know a lot of you probably, maybe some of you don't have dairy goats. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the beginning and not so much about the delivery part, because I think that that's probably one of the most important things. So my daughter just turned 18 and she's going to college for auto body and paint. And I always learn so much from her, but I thought this is a lot like dairy goats, because even if you're the best painter in the world and you have the best spray gun and you have the highest quality paint, if you paint a vehicle that hasn't been prepped properly, it's never going to turn out good and you're just going to have this huge disaster. And I feel like that's really what I've found in my own farm life with the dairy goats. Over the last 10, 12, 13 years, my mom and I are always talking about what went on with our kidding, over the year and what we could do better, and maybe why did we have some of the issues that we had. I'm the primary goat slave here, and my mom makes most of the dairy goat products, so she's the kitchen slave. That's our joke. Anyway, this year we had a couple kidding problems that we haven't experienced before, and looking over it, I just thought if we had fed differently over the time that they were gestating, that we probably wouldn't have had these issues. So I just wanted to start there. There's a lot to feeding proper hay, especially when you're feeding dairy goats, because they produce milk, so they need really good nutrition. Unfortunately, it's not as easy to just go and buy hay off the side of the road and know that you're having a quality product, because a lot of people don't do hay analysis anymore. It used to be really popular to do hay analysis because people cared about the product that they were producing, but now people, I feel like, are kind of just trying to kick out a product and sell it, and maybe they're not so worried about the quality of the product. So if you can buy hay that has a hay analysis, that's like the first place that I would start. Because if you have hay that is too, my mom says I'm talking too fast. I'm nervous. I'm not a public speaker. So bear with me. If you buy hay without a hay analysis, I'm not saying it's going to be terrible hay, but if you have a hay analysis, you can really see what the product is that you're getting. If you're buying an alfalfa and it has 18 to 22% protein, that's a decent alfalfa. If the alfalfa was left in the sun too long before it was baled, it may be way lower in protein and it may be really dry. It may have, 8 or 9% moisture. And if the moisture is that low, then the leaf is going to shatter when you feed it and they won't be getting the leaf, which is really the best part of the hay. Anyway, so with our does, we want to make sure that they're being fed really well and that they're really healthy before we go to breeding. That's the first thing. We give them free choice hay all the time, and we give them a loose mineral, and we just watch for their body condition score. And I sent a link to the body condition score from the ADGA website so that you guys could look into that if you're not familiar. But we give them the hay, the minerals, clean water. Our goats are super divas, and if there's any dirt floating on the water, they won't drink it. So we clean and refill our water twice a day here. Maybe your goats aren't like that. My goats are just terrible that way. If they drop the food on the ground, they will not eat it. And I'm sure if you have dairy goats, you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so we follow an herbal worming protocol with our goats. When I only had, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 goats, I wormed everybody individually, but we have a lot of goats now. We had 50 kids this year, which is too many. And I kind of mass feed everybody with the wormer. So I keep out a kelp with 2 different types of herbal wormers all year round. One is the DWA blend from Fur Meadows, and the other one is the GI Soother. I purchased this from that company for many years, but now that I have so many goats, I just make my own. So I just buy the different organic ingredients, and I mix it all in one big thing. And then I'll take a quart of kelp and a quarter cup, a heaping quarter cup of my herbs, and I'll mix it with my quart of kelp, and I leave that out. And so they can kind of self-medicate with what they need. The GI Soother is really specific for any stomach upsets, but it's also specific to coccidia, which is an issue that you can have in your baby goats. So the other thing I would say is to observe your goats every day. If you're not going out and sitting with your does every day, then sometimes you don't know when something's going wrong. And you wouldn't, I feel like if I leave for town or whatever, and my dad, who's always on the farm, but he doesn't do a lot of the goat stuff. If I leave and I say, Dad, watch the goats, sometimes I'll come back and I'll be like, did you notice that Ginger was stepping back and forth on her feet while I was gone? And he'll be like, no, I didn't notice, I didn't notice that anything was different with her. But because I'm with them every day and I spend time with them every day, I see when something's weird. I see if a goat is stargazing and looking off, and I know that that's not normal for them. And so since I'm spending quite a bit of time with them, I can really see when something is going wrong early, which is important in dairy goats because they hide sickness really well. So spending time with them and watching them and observing them is one of the important things. Okay, so when we're breeding, we pick a buck that is going to hopefully fix certain characteristics. Like if I feel like, the herd is lacking strong pasterns, I'll get a buck that has strong pasterns. And usually I'll buy a buck every couple of years. And sometimes I'm a buck hoarder and I'll buy a couple of bucks, but always with the intention of trying to breed up and breed a better dairy doe that can have a long, consistent lactation and be healthy for many, many years. So I'm always trying to breed a better animal. So the first thing when I'm going to breed is I want to look for an animal that can improve what I have. And the best way to do that, the best time that you can spend money breeding dairy goats is on a herd sire, because he can produce 50 kids for you or 100 or whatever, where a doe is only going to give you, on average 3 babies, if they're Nigerians, per year. So you always want to spend your money in having a better buck so that you can breed up for better. But if you don't have a buck and you're going to lease a buck or go and have your doe bred somewhere else, the number one thing is to make sure that they are biosecurity tested. You want to make sure that this buck doesn't have caprine herpes virus that causes abortions, infertility, it kills kids, it's bad. Brucellosis, also very bad. You should be testing your whole herd for that. And if you're breeding to an outside animal, you want them to be tested for that. Q fever is zoonotic. That means it can spread from goats to humans. If you're going to be consuming your milk, you really want to make sure that they don't have any diseases that can be spread from goat to goat or goat to humans. Toxoplasmosis, chlamydia, both zoonotic. Chlamydia can cause pink eye and abortions. Toxoplasmosis causes abortions, mummified kids. Anyway, there's lots of gross diseases. So if you have to lease a buck, make sure you're getting a buck from somebody who cares enough to do the testing to make sure that the animals are clean. And they should require you to do the testing. If you're going to lease a buck from somebody and they haven't asked you for your tests, like, I want to see it, physically see it. Don't take somebody's word for it that they've done the testing, because I hate to say this because it just sounds mean, but a lot of people lie. They really do. That sounds bad, but they do, trust me. So you need to see it. So making sure that you have a clean herd to start with. Let's see here. Timing. Okay, I wrote myself some notes because I knew I was going to talk fast and, forget what I was saying. So Nigerian dwarves have a heat cycle every 18 to 21 days, and that means they can be bred year round. Their heats are very faint in the summertime, so a lot of times bucks aren't super interested, so we don't really have too many issues with them trying to breed in the summer. But I really love to kid in the dead of winter. I know this is really preference, but I like to kid in the dead of winter because we have a lot of snow here, the ground freezes really hard, and there aren't any parasite problems. I live in North Idaho, 1,000 feet higher than the town of Sandpoint, so I'm kind of way up in the mountains, and our weather is pretty outrageous. But I live off grid. We never have heat lamps in the barn. The goats are really cold hardy, and the baby's really cold hardy. So I don't have electricity out there. I don't run heat lamps, which I think are very dangerous in a barn. If I have a doe that has kidded and I was not present, I will bring out a laundry basket with hot water bottles and towels, and I will make the water bottles as hot as I can get them. And I'll put a towel over it, and then I'll just stick the kid in between it like a little hot dog. One of the things that I see that people think, and I understand why they think this, they think, I have a cold baby goat, I'm gonna warm that goat up. You can't warm a baby goat up because their body temperature is supposed to be 103. And if you're like me, my body temperature is 97. So I'm very cold. Even if I put a baby goat in my jacket and try to warm it up when it is wet and cold, I could be stealing heat from the baby. So it's not really functional to try to warm the baby up. If you come out and you have wet, cold babies, the quickest way to warm them up, if you're not gonna, like, I generally don't want to walk 600 feet from my barn to my house in the snow with a wet baby goat, but I will bring, like I said, the laundry baskets with the hot water bottles to warm my babies. But if you're close to the house and you have wet baby goats and you're worried that they're cold, just stick them in a black garbage bag, around their body, and then put them in some really warm water with their head above it. You don't want them to get wet. And then when their body is good and warm, you can take them out and just make sure that they're really super dry. Baby goats can't nurse until they're 101.5 temperature-wise. So if you try to feed a cold baby, it's not good. You will kill the baby if they eat when their body is not warm enough. So anyways, that was all just to say that I prefer to kid in the winter. I feel like there's less problems with parasites, and really the goats do great in the cold, and they just kind of simmer down in the winter, and they hang out in the barn and they chew their cud, and they're soft and they're fluffy, and it's the best time of year. If you can have a goat camera in your barn, that would be even better, but I tend to just run to the barn 15 times in the middle of the night like a crazy goat lady. So let's see here. Oh, you want to make sure, I should have started with this. There are a million ways to raise dairy goats. I'm not going to claim that I'm a goat expert or that my way is the only way. I can only tell you what has worked for us. I feel like over the years, everything that we've done has kind of changed from one thing to the other. We try something and it doesn't work. We build a goat feeder and it doesn't work, and a goat gets its head stuck in it or whatever, and we scrap that and we try again. And I think that's with a lot of things on the homestead. It's kind of like that, where you have to try something, and if it doesn't work, then try something else. If you go to my website right now, it's terribly out of date. I'm not computer savvy. I had to have my mom set this computer up for me. So the website's in poor condition. But I have herd management stuff on there from, 5 or 6 or whatever years ago that probably needs to be updated. But, you know, like in all things, it's okay to change what you're doing if it doesn't work for you. So I can share with you what has worked for me, but that doesn't mean that it's going to work for you. And so if you disagree,
Okay, it looks like we're having a technical issue with Lori. So guys, just hang tight. Don't leave us. Let us try and get Lori back on. So she's giving us some really, really great information. If you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat. And at the end, we'll go ahead and I'll facilitate a Q&A with Lori for all of your questions.
you know, 5 babies, they really can't feed 5 babies. Because not because every doe won't have enough milk, but a lot of them won't. They just won't have enough milk to support that many babies, but because they have to be patient enough to stand long enough to feed that many babies. And if you have 5 babies and 2 are really big and 3 are smaller, the little ones get crowded out by the big ones because they're always fighting for the teat. And I just don't want to deal with that. So usually if I have a doe that has quads or quints, you know, if they have quads as a first freshener, I know they're going to have quints as a second freshener, and I will be the bad person that moves them on. I will be honest with the new owner. This goat's probably going to give you quints. And some people would be like, this is amazing. I want to have quints. And that's good for you. Not good for me, because I live in the middle of nowhere and we have a lot of snow in the winter, and it's a long, hard walk to the barn when the ATVs won't get there. It's up at the top of a hill. So I have to just do something that's manageable for me. So I don't practice flushing because I feel like my does always have a lot of kids anyways. But if I was going to bottle feed and have a dairy, then I probably certainly would practice flushing to have a lot of babies. So that's one thing that you can do. You want to make sure that your does are really healthy. And likewise, you want to make sure your bucks are really healthy. Because if the bucks aren't healthy, the sperm count is low. And if you check the sperm, they'll have curly little tails, and you're just not going to have healthy kittings that way. So it's so important to make sure the buck is healthy and the does are healthy before you breed. Dairy goats are pregnant. They gestate for 145 to 155 days for Nigerians. During that time, I pretty much always will just feed the does a full alfalfa diet. And I know plenty of people that feed a full grass hay diet. But I have noticed here in my own herd that the years that I had kidding problems that were like abnormal, because normally dairy goats are so good at kidding. They can have babies all on their own. They don't need your assistance. They can clean the babies off. The baby's instinct that God gave them is amazing. They're right away rooting and trying to find the teat and nursing. And plenty of times I've come out to the barn after missing a birth and there's fluffy babies running around. And that's a great feeling. I try to always be there when the does deliver, because sometimes there's problems. But I have noticed on my farm, the times that there have been problems in the kidding barn have always been times where nutrition wasn't great at one point or another for a specific reason. So I'm going to tell you about this year. I actually had a couple of very hard kiddings this year. My favorite doe, Ginger, who came from Rosemary, she had quints. I don't have an ultrasound machine. They're really expensive. So I don't have one, and I've always just kidded without them, and it's always been fine. But she had quints this year. Shame on her. And I noticed, oh, back up. I had another doe that got fat on air. Oh, okay, back up to the beginning. You don't want to breed a fat goat, okay? Don't buy a pet goat and breed it when it's 3, because by the time they're 3 years old, goats get fat, especially if you love them enough to give them treats every day, they're going to get fat. And when they get fat, they have all this fat around their organs, and it makes it so incredibly hard to carry a healthy, pregnancy to term and to deliver safely. I sold some goats to a friend of mine, and she waited until they were 3 to breed them. The kids were stuck. It was very scary for her. I got a phone call at midnight trying to untangle the goats, and they called the goat vet. Well, the vet, we don't have goat vets. Nobody has goat vets. They called the vet, and the vet said, 3 hours, I'll be out there in 3 hours, which around here, when you live so far away, it's likely that if you call your vet, it might be hours before they get there. But I walked her through going in and untangling the kids, and she got the kids delivered before the vet got there, and all was well. But now she's petrified to breed her goats again. So we don't want to wait until goats are 2 or 3 to breed them. I know this is a big topic where people will fight and argue, you should never breed until they're 2, or you should breed at 1, and there's varying opinions. I'll tell you that, somebody that's a producer of dairy goats that has a dairy farm is going to breed their does at the age of 1, to kid out at the age of 1, because they don't want to waste a bunch of money feeding a doe for 2 years to find out that their udder is horrible or they don't have good production, and then they end up having to sell that animal. So that's one of the reasons. But the other reason is because dairy goats get fat. They can get fat very easily. Just like when you see a cow and they're really bony and like kind of scary looking, and you think, oh my gosh, is this farmer feeding the cows? They look so sad and scary. And that's what I used to think. But I was an Army brat, I just lived on base and all my life. And so when I came back from Iraq with my husband and we started a farm, it was all so new to me. But they're supposed to look like that. A good dairy animal puts all of their fat into their milk. So they look very thin. And they're not skinny, it's dairy character. If you have a meat goat, they're big and muscly and they have a lot of fleshing. But a dairy goat that has dairy character should put all of their fat into their milk. But if you're not breeding them and they're not milking, they can put that fat into their organs. So I've seen people butcher dairy goats just for meat because they had too many goats or whatever. They want to send them to freezer camp, and they'd show pictures of, oh my gosh, this doe has been open for a year and a half or 2 years or whatever, and look at all this fat around their organs. So they may not have looked fat to us from the outside, but they really were. They were overweight, and it's very hard to have a healthy delivery when you're overweight. Okay, so yeah, make sure your goats are not overweight. Make sure they are well fed and healthy. If you want to practice flushing to have lots of babies, that's not a bad thing. Oh, what I was telling you about was my bad kidding. I'm off track, I'm sorry. So my favorite doe, Ginger, had quince this year. And because I had a fat girl that I brought on board, we shouldn't say fat girl. I usually say overnourished. She's overnourished, very beautiful doe, but always overnourished. And so I thought, I'm going to take the does off the alfalfa because everybody's body condition score is really good. And I'm going to put them on grass hay for the first, half of their gestation. So I did. I ran out of hay. I went and got grass hay. Nobody had a hay analysis. So the quality of the hay, was anyone's guess. And within about, a month and a half, which by this point it was too late. Within about a month and a half, I noticed that my does were getting a fishtail. Not all of them, but 4 or 5 of them. And a fishtail is when the head of the tail, which should be full, is missing its hair. And so it looks kind of like this. And that's a sign that there's a mineral deficiency or something. Normally, I think if you have good hay and forage, you're not going to have mineral issues. I always give my does a loose mineral. Right now they're on Sweet Licks, Magnum milk because we feed an alfalfa diet. But if I was on grass hay, I'd be feeding the Magnum or the meat maker, the Sweet Licks meat maker. So I changed their food. I started to see some fishtails and I was like, oh, this is not good. What is going on? Well, at this point, there was a lot of snow on the ground and there was no way to bring hay up here. So I was kind of stuck with what I had. So I went to town and I got some chaff hay, which is silage. It's like a baleage, not a silage. It's a baleage, but it's basically a fermented hay product. They take alfalfa, they ferment it with vitamins and apple cider vinegar, and it's a great product, but it's very expensive and still, it would be difficult to feed that full time, and they still need a dry hay product because they need all that roughage for their digestion and whatnot. But I went and got that, and I started feeding that. And this was probably a month before the does were due. It wasn't long before I noticed that Ginger was padding back and forth on her back feet, like tip, 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 you know. And I was like, why is she standing that way? I've never seen her do that before. And she was one of the ones with the fishtail. So I was brainstorming with one of my goat friends, and she said, oh, I just read something about ketosis and how that could be a sign of ketosis. So right away, I was like, oh my gosh, I've been breeding dairy goats for what seems like forever, and I've never had anything like that. So I started mass researching it. And of course, you know, the problem is she didn't have enough nutrition, and she had 5 babies in her belly. So the babies are stealing nutrition from the dam because they need it to grow. And she was getting worse and worse. So I started supplementing her with wine because I didn't want to do calcium gluconate or one of those other things that are not very natural. Not saying that you shouldn't or that you couldn't use that, because you totally could. But I just got her a sweet wine, and I started giving that to her. But it was pretty scary. The last few weeks of her pregnancy, I was really worried. She's my favorite goat. Anyway, to make a long story short, she had quint bucks. 4 of them, 3 of them were dead in the womb. They were stuck. I had to pull the first one out, which was horrible. The second one was born alive, but it was premature. It didn't have any teeth cut through. And at first I thought it was just the 4 bucks. So 3 of the bucks were dead. 1 of them was alive. But 24 hours later, and this was a really horrible, hard delivery for her, she was still contracting. And I thought, is she contracting because this was a difficult pull where I had to really pull on this kid? Or is she contracting because there's still a baby in there? And it was a long night trying to get these babies out. So the idea of sticking my arm all the way in there and sweeping for kids, I just couldn't fathom. And I thought, for sure, she doesn't have quints. Some of that's genetic. If you have lots of babies, you always have lots of babies, and then their babies have lots of babies. Go figure. And she doesn't normally have quints. Normally she has triplets, which is, in my opinion, the perfect amount. So 24 hours later, I went back in, and there was another dead baby in there. Yeah. So Ginger was very sick for probably a month. I tried to take the living baby and bottle feed it so that I could give her body time to heal and repair, but she was very emotionally invested in this baby. So I left her with her little baby, and she fed him for 10 weeks. And then I said, okay, little boy, you have to get out of the barn. And I kicked him out of the barn, and lo and behold, the next day her udder was full. And I was like, wow, she's actually really producing milk. So we put her in the milking string. I was going to give her the year off because she was really doing terrible. But anyway, so the prenatal care is very, very, very important. Making sure they have good nutrition is super important. Let's see here. So 6 weeks before the does are due. Oh, I was trying to tie that into the fact that the times that I have experienced bad kidding seasons, usually it's been multiple does having issues. I'll have 4 years of kiddings where everything is perfect. The does deliver all on their own. I don't have to help at all, which is excellent, because I would rather stand by and just watch God's miracle without intervening. But then there's times where I have 5 or 6 does where I'm having to assist to pull kids. So I can't tell you 100% for sure that it's nutrition related, but I would, in my opinion, it really seems like that is the case. So good nutrition is super, super, super important, because I know you guys all want to hear about the kidding stuff and not the nutrition stuff, but I'm telling you, like, make sure the does are really healthy before you breed them. Okay, so let's get into the kidding stuff. 6 weeks before the goats are due, we give everybody a hoof trim. When they're big and fat and they have a bunch of babies and they're growing in udder and they have really thin legs, it's hard on them to lift a foot up. So you don't want to wait until the week before they're due and then have to put them on the milk stand and lift a foot. So it's important to keep an eye on their feet. If you have a doe that can go 8 weeks between hoof trimmings, or 10 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever, just make sure that you're getting them good and trimmed at least 6 weeks before they're due. About 2 weeks before they're due, we do a maternity shave. I wish I would have taken a picture to show you, but I wouldn't know how to do that because I'm just not very techie. But I basically shave all the way up the sides of the tail, and I leave a little tuft on top of the tail, and I'll shave down the legs and all around the udder. And I do that because it makes it nice and clean when you're getting ready to deliver. It's also a lot easier for the babies to find the teat if it's not really hairy. So some goats are really hairy, and I'll shave in front of their udder, and I'll shave the legs down the sides if they have teats that are on the outside, which I despise, but sometimes they just don't have good teat placement. What can you do? So I'll shave the sides of the udder. This is for two things: to help to keep the doe clean, because they will bleed for several weeks after they deliver. Sometimes they'll stop bleeding and taper off, and then they'll start bleeding again, bright red blood. And every year I get frantic phone calls from people. My goat's bleeding. She kidded 3 weeks ago. I don't know what's going on. And I'm like, it's totally normal, totally normal. But if you don't trim them up, the head of the tail gets so much dried blood and goop on it that the tail hair will fall off, because it's just like too heavy, and like it just doesn't ever clean off. Eventually the hair just falls out. So do your does a favor and give them a maternity shave. Also, a lot of people will say that when your doe is ready to deliver, their udder will get full and shiny. I haven't noticed this to be super regular, because some does won't fill until the day that they're due. But I can usually tell that the udder has bloomed, so it will be fuller than it was. And I'm like, okay, I think she's probably close to delivering. Another sign that your doe is close to delivering is the ligaments on the tail head. So your goat, this is a terrible, terrible picture. Okay. This is a bad picture. Can you see that? There's the tail head right there. This is the vulva with the V on it. Your doe has ligaments that run from the tail back like this. And they feel like hard pencils. They feel like hard pencils. So these ligaments that you can kind of rub your hands back and forth on them and you feel them, when the doe is ready to deliver, the ligaments get soft. It's difficult, and it takes lots of years of doing it, I think, to really be good with checking the ligaments. My mom still can't check the ligaments, no offense. But the ligaments will loosen and stiffen and loosen and stiffen over the last couple of weeks of the pregnancy. When the doe's ready to deliver, those ligaments basically disappear. They're still there, but you can wrap your whole hand around the head of the tail and basically touch your fingers. And it'll give a sunken in look. So you've got the tail and it sinks in. And usually the tail will arch. It'll be like kind of hanging weird. It's hard for me to show you. But when you see it, you'll be like, that's definitely different. So you're just looking for something that's different, right? The babies will kind of sink in. The sides will sink in because the babies have now dropped and they're getting into position. So when I see that the ligaments are gone, I'm not leaving. You're probably having babies in 12 hours, for real. Like, just stick around, there's gonna be babies. The other signs that there's gonna be babies is that they'll be pawing at the ground and digging a nest, and they'll get up and down and up and down. A lot of young does, first fresheners, and even does that are just like emotionally really bonded to you will be vocal. They'll cry. I'll leave the barn and they'll just start crying, and they want you to come back because they don't want to be alone. So they'll get vocal. Older does sometimes will just want to hide. So you'll see, oh, that goat's over there standing in the trees by itself. She must be ready to deliver. Then you probably want to put her in the kidding stall. In the winter time, I put them in the kidding stall the week before because, you know, there's just snow everywhere and they're not going outside anyways. But giving them a quiet place to kid out is the best thing. And then for me, this isn't me saying this is the right way, but for me, I like to kid my does in pairs. So usually I'll have a mother and daughter, and I'll put them in a kidding stall together. That way the mom can be with the doe when she's kidding. A lot of times a mom will clean the babies for her daughter. I've seen does nursing on their dam while they're delivering a baby. It's the wildest thing, but they really have a strong family unit. So if you can kid them out in pairs, then they're not lonely. Goats are very social, and so it's hard for them to be alone. So I like to kid mine out in pairs. Sometimes when I have too many, like I had this year, I'll kid them out 3 or 4 in an area. And I know a lot of people that will kid out in general pop. Gen Pop. Anyways, and you can do that. I've had some does that have been aggressive with other babies and have like plowed into the dam of the other baby over and over again. And when they start doing that, they don't care about the babies and they'll step on them, which is why I tend to break my does up into sections and kid them out in individual pins, does that I know are going to get along. Okay, so I have herbs that I use during kidding season, and I'm going to tell you what I do, and then I'm going to tell you what I would do if I had less goats, which I don't. I have what I have. But I use, let's see, red raspberry leaf, rose hips, fennel, cinnamon, alfalfa. If I'm feeding grass, I definitely would add alfalfa to that mix, and I'll give that to everybody for the last 4 to 6 weeks. And because I group feed everybody, I use that. There are some really good herbal supplements that you can get from Fir Meadows and Land of Havilah that are designed for this prenatal period and just right after the birth too, to really strengthen their uterine muscles and make sure they're fit and toned and ready to have a good, safe, healthy birth. The years that I've been on it with my herbs, I've had no kidding problems. And maybe that's just what it was. I don't know, but there have been years where I've been more lax with things, or I've had a change in feed halfway through where I've had problems. So I can only say that in my mind, I think those things correlate. But the thing about these herbs that you can get from Fir Meadow and Land of Havilah, they have black cohosh in them. So you really can't mass feed something like that. It needs to be dosed appropriately. You wouldn't want to give somebody a double dose if one person isn't going to eat their stuff. So like with my herbal wormers, which I've gotten herbal wormers from both of them and from Molly's Herbal, who runs the Fias Coat Farms. I gave them a link to that, so they should post that. But it's just too time consuming to try to give everybody their individual dose. So I use the Fir Meadows and I leave it out in the kelp all the time. But if I'm concerned that something's going on, like we have huge temperature swings where it's really hot outside and then it's cold and rainy, I'll put the herbal wormer on grain and I'll put it out in a big feeder and then they all fight over it. So that's the best way to get them to eat their wormer because they don't want to miss out on the grain. Okay, so I give these herbs to kind of prepare them. Let's see here. Kidding supplies. I don't use a lot of kidding supplies. I hear a lot of people say the Kelly Kid Puller is a really good kid puller. This year with my stuck baby with Ginger, I tried to use the kid puller, which I've had for a long time and never had the opportunity to use, and I couldn't get it. It's basically like a snare or whatever. I couldn't get it over the baby's head, and I ended up just having to really, really hard pull this baby out because at that point it was like, I'm going to lose the dough and the kids, or I'm going to lose the kids. So I chose to just pull with all my heart and get this baby out. But for kidding supplies, I always have a big bucket, like a 5-gallon bucket with a gamma lid on it that I'll put dry towels in, and then you can use it as a seat. But dry towels, you can use iodine for dipping the umbilical cords if you want to. The doe's saliva has antibacterial properties in it, and so I usually just let them lick it because I like to take a more hands-off approach. But you can also dip it in tea tree oil mixed with oil. That's a good one to keep that clean. So those are some things. Having molasses and hot water for after the doe delivers is really important. You want them to stay hydrated. Being hydrated all during your gestation is important. So in the winter, we give our does hot water twice a day. They drink a lot of hot water in the winter. They don't like cold water, so that's just something that we do. Okay, so let's see here. We talked a little bit about the normal things to look for when the birth is going correctly. Sometimes the birth isn't going correctly, and you need to understand what you're seeing then. If you have a doe that's stargazing like this, looking off like that, or head pressing their head into the wall, these can be bad signs that you're having, ketosis or just a number of other things, and that's maybe not completely normal. So if you have a doe, in a normal birth, you'll have a bubble that comes out, and usually you can have a bubble and then a second bubble will come out, and usually you'll see toes, which look white, 2 toes, hopefully 2 feet, and then the nose right behind it. And this is the normal birth. And they'll push the baby out. And sometimes it takes a second. I don't ever pull the baby out. I've seen a lot of YouTube videos where people grab the baby and they whisk it away and they dry it off. And I just think, whoa, the umbilical cord is still attached, and it's attached to your dough, Let the dough deliver the baby. Let the baby land on the ground. If you want to clean off the nose and clear it, I think you should do that. That's a good idea. I try to help my does. I dry them off, especially in the winter. I'll help them dry them off. But the umbilical cord is attached to the dam, and you don't want to cause a uterine tear. You don't want to have the placenta come unattached when it's not ready to, because that can kill your goat. So for one, I would say that. A breech baby is also a very natural and normal position. I think sometimes breech babies birth easier than not breech, but when a baby is born breech, a lot of times the umbilical cord breaks before the baby is actually born. So because of the way that they're coming through the birth canal. So if you see a baby that's being born breech and the back legs are out and the head is still in, you should pull that baby out, because they will try to take a breath, in the cervical canal, and they can drown. So you want to take them out, hang them upside down, make sure the fluid is out, clear their mouth, Sometimes you can put your fingernail right here and hit this nerve, and that will tell their brain, time to breathe, and they'll come back like that. So those are 2 things to look out for. Sometimes you have an event like I had with Ginger this year, where you have to go in because something's really wrong. So Ginger had been in labor for a long while. I always get really nervous, but I tell people, set a timer so that you know how long you've been in there. If you've been watching your doe labor for 20 minutes, calm down, have a glass of wine. You need to stay calm, because it can be a long process, just like humans. They need to adjust, the baby needs to get into position. But if your doe is pushing hard and nothing is happening, you need to check and see what's going on. If you stick 2 fingers in, which I usually would just bring some olive oil and lavender out to the barn with me, stick 2 fingers in and check, and the cervix is closed and they're pushing, you need to do something for that doe. So at that point, you need to ask yourself, what is this goat worth to me? And that sounds like a terrible thing to say, but early on in our goating here, my husband asked me when I went to the emergency vet on a Sunday with a doe with a broken leg, after having 2 x-rays and a bunch of other stuff, he called and said, you need to think about what this goat is really worth to you. And I was like, oh boy, what does that mean? When I got home later that day, I said, what is this goat worth to you? Just want to clarify, because I know what it's worth to me. And thankfully he said, I wouldn't bulk at 700. So I was like, okay, we got each other. He knows me. But I know eventually there's going to come a day where there's going to be a problem in the barn that I can't deal with. Maybe a day that I can't get a vet out. I'm sure there's some vets viewing right now, so I'm not saying this to be mean, but in my area, vets don't know a lot about goats. You're much, much better off having a goat mentor that can help you than calling the vet for the most part. But when you do need a vet and you do need a C-section, like, praise God for a vet that can give you a C-section or some medication when you have something serious going on. But you have to ask yourself, what is this animal worth to me? Like, there's always going to be a time and a place to have a terminal C-section. Maybe not for you, but as a producer who has lots of goats and has a pretty serious breeding, going on, I have to think about, do I want to spend $2,500 on hay, or do I want to spend $2,500 on having a vet out and having a C-section that may result in dead babies and a dead doe anyways? So you have to think about those things and kind of be prepared for all of that. So the number one thing I would say is, if you're having a problem and there's a crisis, call your goat mentor first. When I've been goating for a long time, and when I have a doe that I really love and something is going on, my brain says, you know nothing. There's nothing there. There's nothing there. And then I got to call my best friend Amy at 2:00 in the morning and say, oh my gosh, what am I doing? And she says, take a deep breath. You're okay. Do this, this, this. And I'm like, oh, of course I do this, this, and this. And then I go and I deal with it. So having a good goat mentor is like the number one thing. You need to have a good goat mentor. If you don't have a good goat mentor, you need to, you can call the lady from Tennessee Meat Goat, and she will answer her phone. Her name is Susan Gasparetto, I think. And 10 years ago, I called her in a crisis. She didn't know me from Sam, and she answered her phone for me. So there are people out there. Call me. I will answer my phone at 2:00 in the morning if you are having a crisis. But a lot of times that's just not going to have the answer that you need. So having a goat mentor is probably the most important thing. But you need to stay calm. So if you have to go in, lube up, you want to go in with 2 fingers first and see, what am I feeling? Is the cervix closed? If the cervix is closed and you have something going on like ringworm where they're trying to deliver a baby but they can't, you can take olive oil or whatever oil you have and a little bit of lavender, and you can work in small circles around the cervix for 20 minutes, 30 minutes until it starts to dilate. A lot of times within an hour you can get a doe fully dilated. I know some people will tell you don't ever try to manually dilate a doe, but if you're in a crisis where your doe is going to die, you have to choose to do something. Whether it's to take a 22 and put this animal out of its misery, or help it dilate, or take it to the vet, you have to make that choice, right? So once you've gotten the doe dilated and you go in, you want to just try to figure out, what am I feeling? Hopefully you're feeling a nose and toes. But if you're not, sometimes a doe or a baby will present sideways where their back is on the cervical opening. And because there's no toes and nose touching the cervical opening, it doesn't dilate because it needs that pressure. And so that's why you're having to manually dilate the cervix, because there's no pressure to dilate that. Once you get in there, you want to push the baby back and try to get it turned around so you can feel the nose and toes. One of the biggest things I feel like is when the first time that you have to go in, which hopefully you never do, but if you're breeding for long enough, it's going to happen. It's hard to figure out, what am I feeling? You have to literally close your eyes and just think about it. Am I feeling a butt? Is there a tail? Can I feel a tail? Are there legs? Is it back legs? Do I feel hocks? Is this 2 legs of the same animal? So you have to figure out what you're feeling and just stay really calm. And if it takes you an hour and a half to get this baby out, that's okay. You don't have to be in a hurry. Your goat's probably not going to die in 10 minutes if they have a stuck kid. If you're working on it for an hour and a half or 2 hours and you can't get it out and you need to go to the vet, then go to the vet. Call the vet ahead of time if you need to, or to ask them to come, and maybe they'll be there in 3 hours. But the main thing I would say is just to really be calm. If you go online, you can look up kidding positions, and having the kidding positions printed out, which I didn't link for you guys because I wasn't sure the legality of giving you these pictures that I have. But if you can look up a diagram of different kidding positions, then when you're in there, you can say, just put them on flashcards and you say, what am I feeling? What am I feeling? Look through your flashcards. Oh, this is it. This is what I'm feeling. And when you can figure out what position the baby is in, you can make it right. You just want to be really careful that you're not pulling on any of the cords, because you don't want to end up killing another baby that's behind it if they're getting stuck and tangled. Let's see here. That's a lot of information, right? Okay, let me give you some afterbirth information. So if I ever go in and I'm worried that there might be a uterine tear is a very, very serious thing. It really can't be fixed even by your vet. They're not going to go in and give you a surgery to fix that. And they say for the most part, they'll be dead within 48 hours if they have a uterine tear. You may not even know it. You'll just come out and they'll be dead. But if I go in and I'm worried about it, I'll give my doe shepherd's purse tincture. Shepherd's purse tincture is good for uterine tears. It's also good for an umbilical cord bleed. So if you have a baby goat that has an umbilical cord that won't stop bleeding, which I've never had, you could tie dental floss on it, but you can also put shepherd's purse in their mouth, a drop or two, and probably on the umbilical cord. So that's one thing that I would say. After birth, a lot of times the does will try to eat their placenta. And for 10 years at least, I let my does eat their placenta all the time. And then one of my does choked on her placenta. And if I hadn't been there, she would have died for sure. And then this year, a very, very famous doe from the Better Ways farm that any Nigerian breeder would know, she ate her placenta in the middle of the night and choked on it and died. So now I'm pretty vigilant to make sure that I see the placenta is passed, and I will throw it out if I'm not going to stay there and let them eat it. There's a lot of nutritional value to the placenta, so I'm not going to say don't let your does eat it. I did for a long time, but just something to think about. When your baby is born and it's warm and dry, it needs to have colostrum pretty much right away. Sometimes the teat plug will be too hard for them to suckle past, and so it's a good idea to squirt a couple squirts off of each teat when the babies are trying to nurse. A lot of times I'll try to put the baby up to the teat and say, here you go, and sometimes they're just so frustrated that it doesn't help and you just have to leave them alone. Is that time? Okay. So let's see here. I feel like, am I missing something important? The main things are to have a good mentor and to make sure the does are healthy before you breed. So I want to tell you a couple stories that aren't too happy, but I want to say the miracle of life is amazing. Goats are amazing. And most of the time, you're not going to have problems. So just take a deep breath. Seriously, it's all going to be okay. But if you do have problems, this is my story about why you want to call a goat mentor. When I had my first set of babies, we had 6 babies. 5 of them were bucks and 1 was a doe. And I had been giving them their herbal wormer really religiously, like I was super on it. I'm kind of a lackadaisical, very casual goat breeder. I want to have animals that are hardy and they can do things on their own and that I don't have to really worry about them. I mass worm them with my herbs. I put it out and let them have it free choice. And that's really worked for me. But I've never had it like, I don't CD&T or do any vaccines, but I've never had a case of mastitis. I've never had a case of tetanus. And so I feel like what I'm doing, it really works pretty well for me. But in the beginning, I was really on it. Like I was on a schedule. I did a great job. And my new babies all of a sudden started not looking very good. They were standing really hunchy. And I was like, this is weird. They don't look like they're feeling very good. And I called the vet. And the vet came out and I said, look, my goats have been eating this plant and now they don't look like they're feeling very good. And she says, well, they have coccidia. I'm like, I don't think so. I've been giving them this herbal wormer twice a week. And every day that it rains, I've been really religious with it. And she's like, it's definitely coccidia. Give them this. So she gave me Corid. I was afraid to give them this medicine because I was doing everything very herbal. And so I said, can you take a fecal sample to confirm? And she said, yeah, I'll have the fecal sample back in 12 hours or 24 hours or whatever she said. Maybe it was 24. So I gave the medicine to the boys and not to the girl, which sounds terrible, but I just really was like, didn't want to have anything happen to this beautiful doe kid. Within 12 hours of giving them this medicine, they were all dead. When the first one died, I called her and she didn't take my call and they died one after another. And the next day I called and I said, I'd like the fecal sample results, please. And she didn't have them. The next day I called, I'd like the fecal sample results, please. She didn't have them. The third day, 72 hours have gone by. I called her, I'd like the fecal sample results. She didn't apologize for my dead babies or anything. And she told me that every goat has parasites. So it was definitely that. 72 hours later, I get my fecal results and she says the fecal sample was clean. I'm like, what do you mean it was clean? You told me every goat has parasites all the time. How could it be clean? Clean for what? And she said, clean for everything. I'm like, what? So I'm back to the drawing board and I call my mentor and I'm like, this is what has happened. And my mentor says, wow, that really sounds like polio, but it couldn't be polio because polio is not something that you could spread from one goat to another. So I'm looking into polio and I realized that polio is, depleted B vitamins. And so then I'm looking into this plant that my goats are eating. And this plant was Brecon fern and it depletes B vitamins. And so here, with my goat mentor's help, I found out that they were eating this plant. It depleted their B vitamins, and then the cord tipped them over the edge, and they died. My girl was fine. She got over it. I gave her B vitamins every day for a week or whatever, and she was fine. But it was a really sad thing, and I thought if I had trusted my goat mentors and not rushed to the vet, maybe it would have been different. My other vet story is that when years and years ago, I had another doe that had quints, and they were 4 bucks and 1 doe. She delivered the 4 and then continued to have contractions for 12 hours. And I called the vet, my goat's still having contractions. Can you come out? I think there's a retained baby. And she's like, no, there's not. She'd be running a fever. And I said, well, I'm giving her garlic, ginger, and cayenne because she had a dead fetus in there. And that would, she wouldn't have a fever with the cayenne pepper. It regulates temperature. 24 hours go by. 48 hours, I'm calling her every day. I really need you to come out. My goat is still having contractions. Something's really wrong. Oh, if she doesn't have a fever, it's not a retained fetus. And she wouldn't come out. 5 days go by and I've called her every day and my goat looks like she's going to die. I know something is wrong. And she passes like 5 gallons of putrefied liquid and dead baby parts. But she still didn't have a fever because I was giving her these herbs that stimulate the immune function. She was getting garlic, ginger, and cayenne every day, which is something I give all of my goats if I think they're not feeling well or something's going on. So anyways, I was afraid to go in. And that is something that I try to tell people now. If you think something is wrong, just go in. It's not going to hurt your doe to go in. You can get in all the way up to your elbow. They are deep and wide. And if I think something's going on, I always go in and check. I always go in and check to make sure there's not a retained fetus. With what happened with Ginger this year, I didn't check that night because I had already super traumatized her, and I thought for sure she doesn't have another baby in there. But you should always go in and check. It's not going to hurt your doe to do that. That's it.
Lori, I'm so glad we're recording this because you just provided us so much information. I can't wait to go watch the replay and just go through everything because you were so comprehensive on everything that you provided. Just thank you so much. It was a really, really wonderful presentation.
Oh, thank you. Oh, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. I hit the wrong
There you are.
button when I was going to see the questions. Okay. So the first question is, when you say you spend time with them, how long each day?
I don't spend an insane amount of time with them. I have a busy homestead, and up until recently, I've had kids in school. I still have a 15-year-old in school. But when I say that I spend time with them, let me tell you what I do. I do what I call the butt check, which sounds really funny. But I'll go out and I'll sit down and I have this long trough feeder that's probably 6 feet long, and it's big and plastic. And I'll go out there and I'll put a little bit of grain in it with my herbal wormer, and I'll spread it out, and then I let the goats out and they charge for it. And then they're all going around, and it's like this merry-go-round because they're running around it, trying to push the other doe next to them to get food. And I just sit there and I watch their butts. Is the tail up? That's the sign of a healthy goat, tail up, okay? Is there poop on their butt? If you're having a parasite problem, you better get on that right away. Goats can look great one minute and be dead the next. Not to scare you. Don't be scared. Goats are amazing and easy for the most part. But you always want to check and make sure that their tail is up and that they don't have diarrhea. The other thing is, are they ruminating? Do you have a goat that has all of its hair fluffed out? Is it grinding its teeth? These are signs that they're having pain. Something's wrong. Right? So I'm just watching everybody. Does their coat look sleek? Do they look healthy? A good coat, good body condition. These are things that I can observe every day and say that goat's coat is nice and shiny, so their minerals are good, check, right? They're well hydrated. I can see it pee, check. You know, they're not grinding their teeth. They're happy. Their tail is up. They're responsive. So these are things that I look for. If I have a doe that's delivering, I'll look for ruminating. You know, when they're really close to delivery, they don't ruminate as frequently. But if you have a sick goat and they're not ruminating, you should be able to hear the left side of their belly as they're rumin. And you should be able to feel and hear this gurgly, moving noise. And you can kind of see it sometimes. That tells you that they're ruminating and they're chewing their cud, and that's a good sign that they're healthy. If they're not feeling good and they're not ruminating, they're going to be dead soon. You have to ruminate. This is so important for a dairy goat. So it's not a long period of time. I can really go out and do a health check of my insanely high herd of dairy goats. You know, in an hour, I can go out and feed and water everybody and do a good check and pet them all and give them love, and I'm done. If I'm milking, you've got to add another hour and a half to that, but I do that probably twice a day. Just spend time, you know, feeding and watering and watching everybody.
Just really getting to know your goats.
Yes.
And what they normally look like. And
Yes.
then you notice those little nuance changes.
Yes.
To pick up on them very quickly.
Mhm.
That's great. Okay. The next question is, which goat breed do you think is best for an easy kidding experience?
Oh, that's a loaded question. I only have one breed of goat. I have Nigerian dwarves. And I think it's the best breed. Number one, because they have the sweetest, richest milk. It's better for making butter. You get more butter with less milk. They eat less food and produce more for the food that they consume. And they're small, so if you have children, they're easy to manage. But mostly because their milk is higher in butter fat than any other breed. So if you're not interested in making cheese and you only want goat milk to drink, Saanens produce the highest amount of milk. They are also the largest goat. Nubians have higher butter fat, less production. They're the big ones with the floppy ears. I wouldn't say that one goat breed kids more flawlessly than another, but honestly, you know, if the herd is healthy, the chances that you're going to have a real problem are not high. I've had many years of no problems at all in the barn. And then I've had years with lots of problems and lots of tears, but you have to pick yourself up and just move on. I mean, you can't like You can't let that get you down. There's so much joy in the barn. Even when you have a problem and you lose a baby, it's sad. But I've never lost a doe to kidding or anything super tragic like that. So I think you hear a lot of scary stuff, but it's not always really scary.
Yeah. So we only have about a minute left. If anyone has further questions, is there a good way to reach you?
Oh, you can email me at graceridgegoats@gmail. I'm also on Facebook, and I have a website.
Okay.
So you're always welcome to reach out. Facebook Messenger comes through up here on the mountain really well. If you have a question, Facebook message me and I'll answer it for sure.
Okay, great. Well, again, we really, really want to thank you for spending this evening with our ladies across the country and teaching us all about the goat midwife process. It was very informational. And I just want to let the rest of our ladies know that next month we'll be back for our next virtual gathering. We'll have Carol Fitzpatrick, who is a master gardener from Walton County, Georgia, Master Gardeners, and she'll be talking about fall being the best time to plant. So with that, thank you all for joining us. Again, Lori, thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you guys all next month.
Happy goating, guys.
Thank you.